Welcome everyone to the lecture Reflective Practice and Writing. This lecture is planned to support you in preparation for your academic reflective journal and to make explicit the processes, as you see from the overview, about what will be involved in preparing and planning for your written assignment. I thought it would be helpful to also just highlight that you have already been involved in the process of collecting and selecting data and thinking carefully about what it is you've observed and trying to make links with literature that you've been searching and linking to your observations and reflecting on it further in your e-portfolio. Your posters have been part of this process as well. As you'll see, and probably know now from having gone through the process of presenting your posters, that what you will find is that the posters will support your written assignment. The overview for the lecture here highlights what we're going to cover in the next few slides. So let's move on to the next slide. If you think about what is involved in the experience of the placement, though you're not formally carrying out research, you are actually beginning to understand what is involved and may well be involved when you embark upon your dissertation in year 3. Wellington, cited in Atkins and Wallace, presents a very helpful table, a way into understanding the processes that you have been involved in, so that you can reflect carefully on what it is you have been doing and what it is you want to focus on for your written assignment. Let's look at the table and start at the top where it says immersion, and as you see in brackets there's a description. This suggests that there's an overall sense or feel for observation or information data. If you think carefully about what you've been doing on placement, you've been recording in your EPPL what you've understood about your placement, what you've been surrounded by on placement, information that you've gathered, observations that you've made, and generally gathering data. If you move to the right, reflection suggests pretty straightforwardly that once you've collected this information, it's helpful to then reflect on it. This is another part of what your EPPL achieves for you or does for you. You've also had your e-portfolio, another space for you to transfer observations, data and information that you've collected and reflect on it further. As we move along, we go to the next block, analysis, breaking down of data into its component parts. Suggests here that you're beginning to think more carefully and more specifically about what it is that you've gathered and discerning really what it means, what elements of your observations you can tease apart and try to understand in more detail. And then to synthesis, a search for patterns, common themes, arguments or ideas. Now this is where it starts to get interesting, because up until this point you've really sort of just been putting a puzzle together of observations and information collected and thinking about what this suggests, but now you're starting to take these pieces apart and try to understand them in more detail and linking it then to other areas of knowledge location and relation, identifying how these fit with other current research. Here, this is where your reading really matters, because as you tease apart what it is you've seen, you can begin to think about readings that you've carried out, or maybe you can look for readings and literature that will help to support ideas that are starting to come together from what you have observed and reflected on. And these are critical parts of the process, because this is where you can really shine and start to demonstrate your ability to analyse from the information that you've gathered, the thoughts that you've had, reflecting on that information and trying to make some sense and interpreting from what you've seen, making links and connecting with literature that you've read, to then be able to present this in a format which you can present to an audience. In the previous slide, we looked at Wellington's model cited in Atkins and Wallace, and hopefully what it does is to help to make clear the process that you're involved in, appreciating why it is you've had different features like the EPPL and the ePortfolio to support you along the way, and how it is that your first assignment is quite key to building up your insight and your understanding and preparing you for the next part. In this slide, I thought it would be helpful to just re-emphasize how you communicate your thoughts, and that your view needs to come across in an informed way, and that the literature, as it says there in bold and underline, constructs a framework on which you base your observations, reflections and analysis. So that cycle is really a way of you unpicking and restitching together a cloth, if you like, or an image, a picture that you can present as a representation of how you see things based on your experience and what you have found out from reading the literature that you have researched. You might recognize the picture on this slide. It's the photo I took of the 9th of March with the first group of presentations that went ahead in the portrait room. Well done to everyone for submitting your posters and for setting it up so well. It really was a very positive experience, and we enjoyed looking at all your posters that you have put together. I thought it would be good to also draw your attention to the bullet points on the slide, as the experience of the posters really does culminate in highlighting elements of the table that we looked at earlier. The poster presentations are a visual representation of that process of data collection and information gathering, and collecting and including your observations and reflections. It's the early stages of the reflective process that your EPPL and ePortfolio have been so instrumental in supporting. And this early stage has been a process of synthesizing that information to present it to your audience. Content, bullet point 4, was very key to signpost that information about your placement and signpost possible focal topics that you're interested to develop further and more depth. And as you can see, this is leading up to the further stage, which prepares you for your academic reflective journal. So as you can see, what you've done so far has been building up and helping you to prepare for the next assignment. Following on from the previous slide, this leads us to discuss more about assignment 2, the Academic Reflective Journal. And what I've done here on the slide is present 2 parts, as it were. On one side, some questions that I think you might be asking, and on the other, extracts from students' work. And what I will try to do is to draw attention to how you can relate one side to the other and reflect more on your preparation for your own assignment. So, question number 1, how do I use the poster to support my next assignment? Well, the information that you've gathered and presented on your poster will help to form the first of 3 parts of your written assignment, and that is the general introduction to your placement setting. I've only included a small part of the student's piece of work, but this student successfully managed to incorporate all the elements that I'm sure you also have in your e-portfolios, with the setting information, about me, and some early reflections that you've made about the information that you've gathered, linking it with literature such as Midwinter and Watmore, about positive placements, and also not to forget that you need to make clear that you have given your setting a pseudonym, as this student has done. The next question, how shall I structure the assignment? What I've tried to do by including this extract from the student sample is to show how the student has given headings. It would be very helpful and strongly recommended that you provide headings for your assignment. Focus topic of discussion has its own title, and the more you can narrow it down, the better it is for you to plan how to introduce the focus topic, how to highlight key points that you want to discuss and incorporate literature that you've referred to, and your concluding remarks about your focus topic. And that's all in the second part. As you see, the student has a title and has started the introduction in a very effective way by making explicit the context and what the topic is, and introducing it in a general way. And then what the student goes on to do is to discuss in more detail key elements that are informed by her observations and incorporate reference to her reading of literature. She goes on further to discuss implications or ways of interpreting her observations and what she's understood from the theory. Finally, there's the concluding section. This is a general conclusion to the overall experience. And as you see, the student has another heading, Concluding Reflections about Placement Experience. Have a look at the way in which the student has presented general reflections, but also pointed to specific elements that stand out. This is another way of helping not just to sum up your experience, but to also present to your reader key features that have had a lasting impact or that have consolidated your knowledge and understanding. Finally, don't forget the bibliography And as I've put in parentheses there, please remember to list all the references that you've used and check that you've formatted the references accurately. That leads to the next question on the other side of the slide. How many references do I need to include? Well, if you think about the word count, which is roughly about 2,400 words, with the 10% margin of less or more than 2,400, then you should really be able to have as many relevant references that help to show your knowledge, but have helped you to engage with the literature and your observations to present a good detailed discussion within the word count. So I would think more than 5, definitely, and as many more that you feel you can incorporate, that are not too excessive, that remove you from or compromise you from having a good detailed discussion. Is there any guidance to support? Well, actually, yes, there is. I've uploaded a document, a Word document, onto the assessment block on Moodle. So please have a look and see the information that I have put up there for you to have a look at. What follows from this slide will be some general slides about reflective writing. Before we go on to talk about reflective writing more specifically, I've included just one slide here about the general introduction, because this does relate to your poster and the sections in your ePortfolio. Have a look at the questions and the sections that are highlighted in blue. And hopefully these will be helpful as well with your thoughts and thinking about your planning. Okay, so what I've done here on this slide is put together some images to illustrate the processes that we referred to earlier in the slides when we looked at the model of the process of reflection. And hopefully this will help you to think more purposefully about planning for your reflective academic journal, your second written assignment. Have a look at the bullet points that actually put into words ways that you can relate to the images on the left, and just highlighting really and making more explicit what it is that you're undergoing in your preparation for your written assignment. Remember, your reflection has been, or should have been, ongoing. You've been making notes while you've been thinking about your experience and while you've been at your placement setting. So in preparation for the placement and while at placement, you've been making notes hopefully throughout. So compare your notes that you've made already, earlier on and later on, in order to have an overview of how you have experienced the placement. Remember to use or refer to your log and your ePortfolio to guide you and support you in your thinking. You should have included references on your ePortfolio and in your ePPL as you've been going along. Okay, in the following slides, I hope to just draw your attention to the elements of reflective writing and hope that you find this helpful in your planning of your written assignment. And there are 3 areas that these slides cover: description, analysis, and critical evaluation. And then towards the end there are some tasks that you can choose to do to consolidate what you have taken from this presentation, and a final slide about what there is to look forward to. Okay. Oftentimes we discourage you from writing descriptively because it seems to take away from the potential of exploring and furthering your discussion and ability to demonstrate that you've been reflecting on issues and researching the literature. But have a look at the questions here on this slide that refer to descriptive writing and how you may use this to identify issues briefly. And this can act as a catalyst for what you can follow up in more detail. What's really interesting and what's helpful in terms of descriptive writing is that actually it sets a scene, it gives a context, it helps to explain what you have read and what you have observed. But it also leads to very interesting parts of your writing that need to be developed and can be developed further for your audience. Analytical writing. It follows on from the description and it starts to explore, weighing up the evidence, trying to sort through and make sense of what you've seen and what you've understood from the theory and literature that you've read. It helps to raise questions and it helps to begin the process of evaluating. Think carefully and think more about what it is that you're trying to include. The analytical structural model. This is where tutors get excited, because when we start to see that your thoughts are developing and you're actually examining issues in more detail and more depth, it really does get our attention. Have a look at the text on this slide, thinking about the situation, possible problems, and ways in which you can engage with the literature and discuss what you've observed, and show your reader that you have the ability to analyze what you have observed and experienced. As you see from what I've noted on the slides, the process of analytical writing helps you to structure your thoughts, to weigh up what others have said, and to compare this with what you have seen, so that you are really getting to the heart of, or getting into more detail, to look at what you can evaluate and what you may want to discuss further. Consider here the slide about critical writing. There are 3 slides dedicated to analytical writing because you're unpicking and trying to really go beneath the surface and make sense of what you have seen and understood. Critical writing then helps to expand further and to push yourself a little bit further to try to provide examples or weigh up the evidence by looking at different arguments to see what other possibilities there might be in the way that you can present and evaluate the evidence that you have and support the point that you're trying to make as a result, balanced by the view of other writers and authors. Okay, this is an activity to just support and consolidate what we've covered. You may choose to do this just as a rehearsal to what you will follow on to do for your own written assessment. Have a go. By now I hope you'll see that what I presented in the slides preceding this slide have tried to look at individual aspects of how you can understand this model that was introduced at the very beginning. And the video, hopefully, which I hope you've had a go at, can help you to practice this and get you warmed up, so to speak, to think about your own process of thought and reflection in preparing your written assignment. And here is now the second part of the activities that was arranged. And this is where you can really try to relate what you have done in the previous slides to your own written assignment, using the model to support your approach. Follow the bullet points, look at your portfolio, think about the setting information and how you had prepared for your posters and noted observations that you'd carried out. You're reflecting here about the description as has been outlined in the presentation, and analytical or critical discussion about what you want to include, developing your thoughts with more depth and detail in an informed way. So what are the points that you identify from the sequence of activities and responses that you've had from your placement setting? These may inform you about the theme that you want to focus on. Perhaps this has changed since you did your poster. That's perfectly all right. Remember, it's just one focus topic in the middle section of your written assignment that you are writing about. Also remember to highlight or draw out, signpost what specifically you've seen that you may want to draw upon and reflect on from the observations. So look back at your notes, look back at what you've reflected on and see what's useful and relevant to help you. And talking about what's relevant, also think about the literature that you might want to use to support further reflection from your observations to help you develop the analytical and critical discussion that we're looking forward to seeing in your written assignment. Okay, something a little different. Remember your e-portfolios? I think I've mentioned it a few times throughout this presentation. You also were doing the Chancellor's Award. I hope you've been working your way through each of the sections. It really is good practice for you, and especially as we move forward and you're thinking about planning ahead, it's very useful to you, and I think you'll agree with that in time if you haven't already. But please remember to complete all sections and to upload a copy of your certificate onto your e-portfolio. It would be really good to see these, a way of celebrating your achievement of completing the award. Remember also that I've mentioned that we will be putting feedback on your e-portfolios, and these will be available to you. And for those of you who haven't for some reason already done so, please remember that you should have all customized your e-portfolio by now. This will be important for you when you think about exporting it later and wanting to use it after you've completed Year 2 for preparing for Year 3 and beyond the degree, when you think about cover letters and applications for future courses on PGC or for work applications. So it's really an asset, and try to think of it this way. It shouldn't really be a burden. It's all working towards a very good and positive end, very useful for you in the future. Trust me. Okay, what's coming up? Well, your posters are at this moment being moderated and marked, and this is where the images that you've uploaded for your posters are really crucial, because these are helping us to look and evaluate your presentations. Feedback will be available soon, as I've noted here, and I will inform you when the provisional marks and feedback are ready for you to view. The idea for the feedback at this stage is to support you with planning for your written assignment. Don't forget, as in bullet point 2, to complete all 3 sections of the Chancellor's Award, and please do upload your certificate onto your ePortfolio. Next week, I'm planning for a Zoom session. I'm getting to grips with the new technology, and actually it's not as difficult as it may seem. So please don't be afraid to try it out and sign up to join the group session. I'll post some details on Moodle to follow. Further and lastly, any students who have concerns or queries, please do look at Moodle at the frequently asked question, frequently FAQs on Moodle to support you. There's lots of information there to help. Some of you may be worried about not having completed your placement yet, and there is information there to help you, to put your mind at ease. And of course you can still email myself or Shirley with any particular queries that you have. Thank you for your patience with my recordings, and I hope these audio clips have been helpful.